It's April of 2003. Your name is Aaron Ralston. You're a cocky, self-involved climber who loves being alone out in the desert. You're walking through Canyonlands National Park in southeastern Utah, all alone. You come across two other hikers, flirt with them for a little bit, leave them to complete their own walk in the desert, and then off you go to explore a canyon. A place called Blue John Canyon, which is a formation that climbers know as a slot canyon. That is, it's shaped exactly in the way that the name implies. It's very deep and extremely narrow. In fact, it's so narrow that in many places a climber can reach out and touch both sides simultaneously with a hand. So narrow that even relatively small boulders can be perched between the two sides and held in place only by friction. But because you've done this kind of thing so many times before and have told no one where you're going that day, this slot canyon should be no problem, just like all the other ones. You descend into it and you explore its side, and you also explore and test your own abilities and your own climbing fortitude. And then in a moment of almost existential accident, you dislodge an 800-pound boulder which falls straight down and pins your arm, your right arm, against the rock canyon wall. Well, at first you yell for help, but wait a minute, I'm in the desert. There's no one out there, and so no one responds to your cries. And then you think, well, I'll use my survival training. I'll take the multi-tool that I brought with me, the climber's version of the Swiss Army knife, and I'll chip away at the 800-pound rock, and as soon as I can get rid of 1 or 2 pounds of it, I'll have created a space big enough to dislodge my arm, and I'll be free. But the multi-tool very quickly proves to be far too small and far too dull to make any real progress because I have brought the wrong stuff. About halfway through the efforts, you turn on your digital camera and begin to shoot a video diary, because no matter what happens, at least you can be the star in your own movie. You realize that your water's running out, and when you measure it, because you're very experienced, you know exactly how long that many milliliters of water will keep you alive. Your food begins to run out, and your strength begins to fade. And you realize that death is creeping up on you like a panther in the dark in the jungle. You realize that death is going to start as thirst, then become depletion, then become delirium, and then there's going to be nothing. And the 800-pound rock, which has your arm pinned against that canyon wall, the boulder that stands between you and the rest of your life, does not care. It is a completely inanimate, soulless object whose only function in the universe is to obey the laws of physics. And ironically, in that obedience, it has now pinned you in a place which will be just as fatal as a lethal injection in a state penitentiary or a round from an assault rifle. And all of your life has conspired to place you in that spot, pinned in that slot canyon, with your training exhausted, your strength gone, and even your good luck having deserted you. You're now a man who is left with one boulder and one choice. Jesus was really comfortable talking about the times in life when there's just one choice, and when that choice is a hard one. Today we're going to continue our series of talks called Can't We All Just Get Along, which are drawn from the book of Matthew. Today in chapter 18, this book and this chapter deal with how followers of the Lord are to get along with each other when they're in community, something which should be easy, something which should be fun, something which should be problem-free but almost never actually is. And in the flow of this chapter, Jesus has his closest followers gathered together with him. They're in a city next to the Sea of Galilee in northern Palestine. called Capernaum, probably inside a house which may have been owned by the family of one of his followers. And they have been fighting over who is the greatest. See, as soon as you get together in a group, you have problems immediately right from the beginning. He confronts them about this and basically says this argument is a fool's errand. If you're going to make the center of our being together who is the best, in other words, it's all about a status kind of a situation, what's going to happen is you're going to destroy everything that we have. What you need to do is trade in that arrogance for some childlike humility and make sure you don't hurt anybody who has very little status, because if you do, it's going to be better for you if a millstone were tied around your neck and you were thrown, the original language means, into the open ocean. He goes on with these words, Matthew chapter 18 and verse 7. He comes out of the millstone into these two comparisons, and that text is on the back of the program you received when you came in this morning if you'd like to read along. Woe to the world for temptations to sin, for it's necessary that temptations come. But woe to the one by whom the temptations come. Now this double woe formula is very familiar to a Jewish audience because it is drawn from the Old Testament prophets who used double woes, that's a lot of woe, to talk about the judgment of God falling on people. So as soon as these Jewish people that he's speaking to in his immediate audience hear this, my thought is probably their heads drop the way that people do when they hear that the pastor's going to talk about money next Sunday. They go, oh. They hear woe, woe, they go, oh, more negative, millstones and fiery hell, and this is all so negative. I'm so tired of the woe. Can't we get back to the happy stuff? Like, oh, blessed is he who does this, and blessed is he who does that. My soul is fed by that, but this woe is so, we've got to get away from this. So when Jesus uses this, what he's doing is he's announcing in a way that people from that culture would be sensitive to, that what's about to come is pretty heavy duty. He's saying you really need to pay attention to this because we're going to talk about some stuff that is going to be really difficult. We're going to talk about what happens when you've only got one choice. When there's just the rock and the choice. And that's all there is. Now, some commentators feel that this passage is a little bit odd in its placement in the passage, that as you feel your way through the fabric of this chapter, these few verses, 7 through 9, feel like a lump, if you will. They're like a lump in mashed potatoes because they're a little bit out of sync with the other verses. And the truth is, if you take verses 7 through 9 out of the chapter, verses 6 through 10 fit together perfectly, like a resection. It works really well. And so what makes sense to me is because ancient authors did not have footnoting or cross-referencing. What they did when they wanted to refer back to something previously sometimes is they just said it again, right in the course of what they were currently addressing. Something like going on a discussion board to look up what's wrong with your iPad, and then you find out that in some of the posts where you get your tech support, they quote the text of the post that they're responding to at the beginning, at the top of the thing. It's exactly the same kind of formulation. And so when Jesus said these things earlier, which is in what we call the Sermon on the Mount back in Matthew 5, they were mostly confined to violations of the 7th commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. But here, as Matthew repeats them again, and repetition means emphasis for an ancient hearer, it's being broadened to everything that people do wrong. It's applicable to everything that people stumble over, that they fall into. The original words here that have to do with sin and so forth have a root that refers to stumbling. And so he says, look, the world is full of places to stumble. It's full of slot canyons. And sometimes people bring stumbling into your life on purpose, or you do it to other people, or do it to yourself. You dig your own canyon. And when that happens, the outcome can really be woe. Now, living in this city, we understand the whole concept of stumbling. If you've been on a Berkeley sidewalk, that's something that we're constantly having to look out for. I remember when we first moved here, I always had this thought, why do you get so little eye contact on the street? Because we're from a culture where that's very common. And one reason, of course, is you can be shot. But the other reason is that our sidewalks here are so uneven that if you look up for too long, you will end up doing a face plant somewhere. And I'll bet you, check this out this afternoon, I bet you don't even realize you're doing it because you've been over so many uneven sidewalks. I've often been on the edge of falling over myself and collapsing because you just catch your shoes on the edge of these things. And in the same way, the world is full of places like that, where if you're not watching out, you can end up with the rock in a choice because you've stumbled over something and we've ended up falling down. Sometimes life can be like an obstacle course. It's just full of places to trip and fall because that's just the way the world is. Nobody has to mean you ill or want anything bad to happen to you. It's just, would you agree with me? It's a jungle out there. I mean, there's so many ways you can go wrong in life. And just being out there in the world, you can end up tripping and falling over things that you had no intention of ever becoming involved in. Different boulders seem to affect different kinds of people, and you can start out very innocently and end up deep in something you had never any intention of becoming that involved in, and you wake up one day and it's got you. I am currently in this predicament myself because I went to Phil's Coffee and had mocha tesora. Have you had this? You must not. You must not begin this. This happened on the recommendation of John Silcox, who I blame for this problem in my life completely. Janet and I went, we were with Churro, we went up to Phil's and had some coffee. And I remembered standing in front of the counter. John said that mocha tesora stuff was pretty good, and so I ordered one. I was trying to be conservative. I just got a small one because I thought it's little. What can go wrong? Little did I know I was in one of my own slot canyons, and the boulder was above my head. If you haven't been to Phil's to have this kind of coffee, what it is the combination of dark roast beans, ground. They make coffee from that, of course, and then into it is mixed very dark chocolate cocoa. And the two are put together in what I'm sure is a highly secret formula that results in something that I must have. I must have this. Now, at my age, this drink, which is massive amounts of caffeine and massive amounts of completely indigestible sugar, is a suicide cocktail. If my doctor knew I had even one of these, he would slap my face and demand that I have no more. Just after having the one, I feel like I need an intervention in a support group, or at least a reality show. Or maybe I'm being set up for rehab and then my comeback, in which case 360 Church will just be even more famous because the comeback guy. You know, and so I'm laughing about this to myself the other day because it's sort of silly, and I think this is exactly what happens. You're not looking for trouble most of the time, are you? You're not a bank robber. You know, you're not an international counterfeiter. You're not a terrorist. You're not stealing bearer bonds out of somebody's safe. You're just a regular person, and in the course of life, you come across mocha tesora, and before you know it, something you thought could never be a problem becomes a life-controlling issue, or not even necessarily life-controlling, just something bad. And I can say to myself, no, it's not an obstacle course, it's a rose garden. It's all going to be fine. I don't have to be worried. I can handle this. Other times life is like a minefield, and it isn't just that there's trouble out there, it's that people really do put things in your way. They do put tripwires out there in front of you. Like the friend that gives you the wrong answers for the midterm, hoping that you'll get a lower grade than he does and he can get the spot in grad school that you would like to have. Like the rampant cheating we have on our campus. Like the person who beats up his date just because he can. Or like Chanel designer Karl Lagerfeld, who has 2 maids who work 24/7 shifts to take care of his kitten. Making sure that the cat's every need, which includes an iPad, by the way, are met. Now, you know, I'm not a harsh person, but I'll tell you, you should burn in hell for that. You should just, if you have 2 maids take care of your cat, something bad should happen to you. You know, I don't care what you believe. That is just bad. That is so completely terrible. And I'm here to tell Carl that this morning. He needs to repent and get right with God about the whole cat thing. Those kinds of things are some of the times when we get ourselves into trouble because we choose the slot canyon. And we call it a garden path. This will be good. I've done this before. I know just what to bring. My self-confidence is enormous, and have I told you, my skills even more so. And so I'm going to be able to go down into this canyon, and it is going to be no trouble whatsoever. Everything's going to be good. And when I get to the other end, I'll have a wonderful experience, and once again, I will have been the star of another one of my own movies. And Jesus' words ring loudly in our ears when he says, "Woe." So he says woe twice. One refers to us individually, one to kind of the conditions just in society in general, and then he connects those 2 woes with 2 possible outcomes. They're really both just examples of the same thing. And he says this in verse 8, "And if your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to enter life," the phrase there has the meaning of enter the next life, "crippled or lame, than with hands or 2 feet to be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It's better for you to enter life with 1 eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into the hell of fire." These 2 comparisons, which both do make the same point, are interpreted in a couple of ways. Some classical scholars take a look at that and say, well, what this is just an announcement of retribution. If you sin, you burn. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's telling us that the wrath of God is coming. There's another school of interpretation that says, well, probably really it's more like a comparison. What he's saying is that the consequences of not dealing with the things that bind us and the sin that so easily overtakes us, as the scripture says, are so terrible that you're so much better off doing something painful now and getting rid of that than facing what comes in your life or thereafter afterwards. I kind of lean towards that second one, not because the notion of God's judgment is not true. It is true. It's just not necessary for him to say it here because he says it so many other places. And it's throughout the Bible, like A to Z. But he's clearly not recommending physical mutilation of ourselves to try to live right. Besides how completely extreme that would be, that's totally abhorrent to his Jewish audience. They never would be able to even hear those words. And Jesus plainly teaches elsewhere that sin really comes from your heart and not from your physical bodies. It's not what a man does on the external side that defiles him. It's what goes into his heart. And so when his disciples are criticized for not washing their hands, and he tells his enemies, well, hand washing really is neither here nor there. If not washing your hands can't help you, how can cutting them off? It doesn't make any sense that he's speaking in physical terms. So he's telling them, look, woe is coming if you stumble and fall, whether you're involved in it or whether you've made these choices, whether the slot canyon was just there or whether you went down into it because that's just what you like to do. And when in that place where there's just a boulder, there's just a choice. There's just a choice. There's just one option. Now, as an American, this offends me. Because our lives are supposed to be about an endless sequence of happy choices. Isn't that what they told you at Cal? If you graduate from here, we guarantee you that you can live an endless highlight reel of incredible fascination and joy. On the other side of which is, I don't know, giving to the alumni fund, or leaving money to us in your will. I don't know. They don't really have a theory for the rest of it. But that's kind of what we're promised. And what Jesus is saying is that's a lie. That if you stumble and fall, and you stumble into something that is whatever a slot canyon is for you and for me, that when we're in Boulder situations, there is only one choice. As un-American as that is, there's only one option. And the really painful part of it isn't the physical part. The painful part is the realization that there aren't any other choices. That Aaron Ralston can't negotiate with the boulder. That he can't leverage it out of the way. That he can't move it and continue on as if it never happened. There's just this one choice. And when faced with that, the question is, will I exercise it? Or will I die? Because left in place, it's woe. Left in place, it's woe again. Left in place, it's worse than what that choice has to be. For a faith community to work, what Jesus is saying is there is no painless way to deal with sin. There is no way to negotiate with it, to condition it, to call it something else, to say, oh, this isn't a boulder, this is a marshmallow. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing, I can handle this. This isn't a boulder, this is just a pillow. This boulder doesn't weigh 800 pounds, it weighs only 8 pounds. I can lift this, I'm just resting for a while. Or my personal favorite, I meant to do this. This is going just the way I thought it would go. All my Army Ranger survival training is going to kick in now. And I'm going to release myself and everything is going to be fine. And Jesus is telling his probably stunned followers, when you've got a boulder, you've just got one choice. You realize near the end of 127 hours that your entire life has focused you to perish in this slot canyon. That everything about how you've been, how you've thought, how you've acted has been one long funnel taking you to that place pinned by that boulder to die and probably never be found and never be heard from again. But you marshal the will to use your one option. Taking the tube off the water tank on your back, you form a tourniquet. You take one last photo of the rock. Walk up out of the canyon. You rappel down a 65-foot rock face, one-handed. Walk several miles, and now covered with dirt and blood, you collapse in front of a family who was out on a day hike, who by sheer chance finds you, contacts the authorities, and a helicopter arrives, and you're taken to a hospital where your life is saved. And you are portrayed by James Franco in a film nominated for 6 Academy Awards. See, it's not so bad to serve the Lord. But in that canyon, there is no painless way. Confession is not painless. Repentance is not painless. Honesty is not painless. Accountability is not painless. Stopping is not painless. When Jesus went to the cross for victory over sin and death, it was not painless. Lord, we thank you for having one option which we do not deserve. We only deserve the boulder. We only deserve to be held in place. We've all fallen short. We've all stumbled. We've all found ourselves headlong. We've all found ourselves stuck at the bottom of a slot canyon that looked so fun and innocent when we started, and it's turned out to be so dark and so deep and so deadly. And when all we have deserved is the rock, you have given us the choice, Lord, of removing that thing from our life. of saying, God, I don't want this anymore. These thoughts, this behavior, this relationship, this involvement. And I want to remove that. And throw myself on your grace and mercy. And ask you to take me on to my life as it really could be. Instead of the life that I thought I could have when I got into this hole in the ground. Let's just remain in this attitude of prayer for a moment. Our band's going to lead us in worship in just a minute. But if you'd like to be free this morning, that thing that seemed maybe okay is feeling like a boulder today. The grace to accomplish that is here. I'm just going to ask you, with every head bowed and nobody looking around, if that's your heart today, say, I want to be rid of this thing. I want to remove it from my life. This relationship that isn't healthy, this thing that is messing me up morally or ethically, it's just got to be gone. And I want this to be that moment for me.